Record. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF DocFest. We've been bringing films from all around the world to the San Francisco Bay Area for 21 years. And as you know, we have a really kind of a independent streak going on here. And so when we ran across this film, Other Like Me, you can imagine that we just kind of felt it was kismet. And this is the sort of film that we love to program at SF DocFest. And we're lucky enough to have one of the co-directors here, Dan Fox, with us. Hi, Dan.
Hi. Thanks for having me. And thanks for screening our film at your festival.
Yeah, most definitely. I think folks in the Bay Area will really get a kick out of it. Maybe a good place to start is I know folks often wonder of how do people get kind of, choose the subject matter for their films, and then get access. So how did you kind of decide this was kind of the rabbit hole that you wanted to go down and know that there was kind of a film to be made?
Well, that's a good question. My co-director, Marcus Werner Head, had made a film for the BBC about, getting on for 10 years ago now, about a sort of very eccentric artist called Bob Parks, a British artist who had led quite an extreme life and had done things on the edges of the performance art scene in Los Angeles in the 1970s before moving back to Britain. Anyway, it was let's say there were some difficult scenes in it, and there was quite an edgy sort of subject matter in a way, and the BBC showed it, and it turned out to be quite an unusually sort of popular film. And so a few years after that, the BBC approached Marcus again and said, would you be interested in making a film initially about Coombe Transmissions, which was the performance art precursor to the band Throbbing Gristle. And they asked us in the year, it was 2017, which was when Hull, the city they sort of all met and kind of came together in, was the designated city of culture, which is a sort of like a roving thing in Britain where different cities are sort of designated a city of culture and given funding to do various bits and pieces. And there was an exhibition that Cozy Fanny Tutti had organised in Hull specifically about Coombe and going from the origins of Coombe up till roughly sort of the beginning of Throbbing Gristle. And so the BBC approached Marcus and said, would you like to do this? And Marcus said, sure, but I'd like to bring my friend Dan in because I was more familiar with the group and their work than he was. And, I'd spent a number of years working as an editor of an art magazine and doing a lot of writing about contemporary art and music. And so we thought we'd make a good team on it. And as we were kind of, reading up on the history of the band, and I was sort of reminding myself of certain aspects of their background, it became immediately clear that it wasn't just one rabbit hole we'd be going down. It was an entire Warren system that we'd be entering. But there would be an amazing story in there, and one that had all kinds of links and connections to so many people in Europe, in the UK, in North America. I mean, far more than we thought. And as we realised, it would be a very rich story. So yeah, then the BBC said, great, this is the first time we've ever made a film about these people, and it will be the last time. Here's a chance. And that's how it began. So it was initially made, it was initially made for British TV, so for a national TV audience. And that, I think it's important to mention that was, that really guided us in how we would ultimately sort of tell the story and what we would put in. We weren't coming at it as, making this a film for the big hardcore mega fans. Right. We had to approach it from the assumption that most people watching this film would never have heard of any of the people in the group. So we couldn't get into sort of a lot of the real sort of super fan nitty gritty of like, releases on French punk labels in 1977 and that kind of thing. But it did also allow us to tell the story in another kind of way, and ask some sort of bigger questions maybe about the group.
Well, I think you did a nice job of kind of straddling that balance, in the sense that, like, I think that obviously there's some good doorways to enter if, like, you've never heard about it, but I think that there's kind of enough layers that makes it interesting for those that are, at least fans are familiar. So it's just kind of I don't know, it's kind of like a prism, I guess. You can kind of see the film in different ways based on your familiarity. Um, Obviously, one of the challenges with making, which by its nature is kind of a historical documentary, is being reliant on, ephemera and artifacts from that kind of time period. Is that, did you have an idea of, like, what was available when you began, and were there any kind of surprises as you started to kind of dig into the history?
This is a great question. We Okay, so when I used to work for an art magazine, we would do, an article, say, on a long lost 1970s performance art group, and there would be one dog-eared photograph and a flyer, and like that was the entirety of all the visual archival surviving information that there was to use to illustrate an article. We had an idea that Coombe and Throbbing Gristle had a lot of archival material, but we weren't prepared for just how much there was. I mean, they're really unusual as a group in that they generated huge amounts of paper ephemera, whether that was through the mail art that they were doing, through flyers, broadsides, gig posters, so a lot of like printed matter, collages, whatever the individual band members made. But they also had a lot of photographic documentation. A lot of people took photos of their performances as Coombe and as Throbbing Gristle and would send them photos afterwards. Through band members such as Sleazy, Peter Christopherson, they had access to video equipment, which allowed them to film their shows. We were spoiled for archival material with it, really. I mean, our problem was almost like, there was too much to put in. But then there were things that we expected to be in existence that weren't. For instance, we knew that when they did the prostitution exhibition at the ICA, we knew that they'd been interviewed by London local news station, and we searched to the ends of the earth for that video footage, and it doesn't exist anymore. We think the tapes were wiped because it was a time when news stations would often just wipe tapes for just to make space. But then there was other stuff that we didn't know about, and which we subsequently discovered. There's some really great footage that you will have seen in the film of them doing a performance with John Lacey, and John Lacey playing the synthesizer, and Genesis and Cozy dressed up doing kind of strange sort of ritualistic things in what looks like a large kind of hall. We had no idea that footage existed, and we found it through an art video archive in Canada, I believe it was.
Oh, wow.
And also we were so lucky, like everyone who'd been involved in the group opened up their archives to us and showed us lots and lots of things that we were familiar with, but also new things that we didn't know about. And then when we were doing some research, people in Hull sent us like photographs and like Super 8 footage that someone's auntie had photographed out of a car in 1968, 69, and that really kind of helped bring it alive.
Yeah. Do you think as you were kind of reaching out to each member, was there any reluctant, and in some ways they feel so much of like people of the moment, and I don't know how you've continued to live over the years, but like, was there any kind of reluctance in like kind of reflecting back, or was there kind of a outside of for posterity, I mean, even a kind of creative motivation for looking back at this time for them?
It's a good question. I I understand from uh, Cozy Fanning Tucci that she said that before they did the whole exhibition about Coombe, there was people had been members of the band had been more reluctant to sort of go back and look at that time again, but kind of revisiting the material had made sort of opened people up a bit. I think it's yeah. I mean, I can't answer that question really for each and every person. I think that it is a. I think maybe when people reach a certain point in life, you feel like, well, maybe I would like to kind of come to terms with this thing that I did and this thing I did in my youth, and maybe I was a different person then, but it'd be interesting to revisit it and talk about it. And a lot of people have changed, and I think that was, or or are more reflective. And I think that was a really interesting thing for us as filmmakers, which also gave us some interesting directions to go in. I think that there's a version, there's a kind of a Throbbing Gristle Coombe film that you could make, which would be 90 minutes of like banging music and Genesis screaming discipline, and then footage of people doing unspeakable kind of things to each other, and it being really sort of about them as 20-30 somethings in the 1970s. But they weren't the people we met. We met people who were around about 70, and interested in gardening and living a quieter life, and feeding their cats and dogs, and that actually seemed like a more kind of perversely fun and subversive way to make a Throbbing Gristle documentary than to go the kind of banging industrial route. Would be like, no, let's open this film with a tour of a garden. Sort of be the kind of the quieter, counterintuitive, just to show that there is a long period of time, and people's lives develop and progress and change, and although the fans and those of us who are familiar with their work have an idea of them in our heads as they were doing that really kind of hardcore stuff in the 70s, they are also people with complex layered lives too.
Yeah, it's a nice subversive way to make a very punk documentary in that way.
Yeah.
As you were, you edited the film too, is that right? Or were one of the
I did,
co-editors?
yeah. I was with the help of Mariko Monpetit, I edited it, yeah.
So maybe like, can you share a little bit of like, so much of a historical film is made in the editing room. I mean, all films are made in the editing room, but like, how is it that you kind of, at what point in time did, given your background as a writer and things, where did the structure come into place, And at some point in time, was there like a 6-hour film and you had to cut it down to the 90 minutes, or like, what was that kind of process like to kind of, figure out the story?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, there was I think like a 4-hour version that was big and unwieldy, and I think that there always is, when you're making a film, because you sort of want to start with cram as much in as you feel excited about. We had two things that we had to keep in mind. First was that the BBC version of the film, there is a separate cut of this, which is only 59 minutes long.
Oh, okay.
So we had to make that first, and that had to be really, really tight as anything. And then we made this longer version, and we thought initially, well, okay, that's got really room to spread out. But we sort of got so, I think, I think Marcus would agree with me. I think we'd got so sort of locked into the kind of like, got to keep it tight, you know, mentality that we only ended up stretching it to about 85 minutes. I think, you know, it was like, you know, like a sort of a 1 minute long hardcore punk song or something, you know, we were only kind of like really drilled into that. It, because this story is so complex, and there are so many tangents that you can go off on at any point along the way. We quickly realized that there was no the more kind of experimental or the more complex that we got in terms of structure, the less clear everything got, and it got muddier and muddier. And it felt like the more we kind of stripped away, the clearer the actual narrative became. So we decided to actually go at it in quite a straight way and just tell A to B, you know, beginning to end story, you know, and use quite a conventional chronological structure, because what you are watching in terms of the content is so bananas and so sort of mind-blowing and fascinating that the more we got in the way of it, the more we did to it, or that we just got in the way of the clarity of the narrative. So you know, it was helpful actually having this sort of voice in the back of our head saying, no, keep it simple, peel it back. Of course, you know, there are you're led by what you've got in terms of the interviews, you know, and we had many hours of interviews with everybody, but you know, that also shapes how you tell the story. You know, some people are clearer about certain periods than others, and some things you just have to show rather than have the band tell, because they haven't sort of, they may be foggy on things that have happened, right, and remember it, you know, and which is interesting. You know, it's interesting how people remember things differently, and that's all part of like how history is made, isn't it? You know, these sorts of contradictions and different angles,
especially, yeah, I mean, each individual's motivations at that time and why they were doing it.
But I think we also wanted to use, sorry, just wanted to add there, I think we also, one thing that I wanted to do a little bit was see how I could use the soundtrack to also add an extra layer of sort of narrative on top of it. And so you hear throughout the film these snippets of interviews, you know, voices, which are taken from a lot of, they did a lot of interviews that, just audio interviews, you know, a few of which they released on on cassette tapes on industrial records. And so we made quite a lot of use of that and old archival Coombe transmissions recordings, so that you don't just have them now, you know, the present day speaking, you've also got their younger voices sort of coming in and sometimes contradicting what they're saying and sometimes sort of commenting what they're saying.
That's cool. You know, as we kind of wrap this up, one thing I was wondering is that, you know, through all these conversations that you had with the members and things, do you think that there's like a collective kind of like what folks would want us to take away from this kind of experience and what they did, or like in the sense of, you know, if they were in their kind of creative lives today, or for those that are pursuing creative lives, is there kind of like, you know, something that you think that they would kind of encourage folks to kind of go out and do?
Yeah, I think all of them would encourage people to, I think, not feel like you have to have gone to art school or gone to university to and be you know, have qualifications in order to do these things, in order to be an artist, be a musician, live a creative life, you know, whatever kind of, however you see it. You know, that you don't necessarily have to live in, you know, the big kind of cosmopolitan centers of the world, but you can do it wherever, you know, you make your own scene, you make your own world, and you make it with whatever you have, and what you have to hand, and you don't need to have I mean, it's nice to have, resources, but if you don't, you can make things. You can do things with whatever you've got, and whoever you've got. And there is I think there is a strength in community. I know that's an overused word these days, but there is a strength in friendship and community and working with people. And sometimes that's fractious, as you can see from our film. People didn't always get along together. But that creates its own energy and dynamisms and so forth. And I think that you don't have to wait for someone to tell you you're allowed to do it, to do it when it comes to making art or music. And I think that may sound like a cliche, but it's really true. And I got that sense from them very, very strongly. And it was actually, coming away from making the film and speaking to all of these people, I found that actually quite inspiring in the end.
Yeah, I think it's always inspiring. I think there's a reason why people come back to it, is that people have to, it could be a tough road, so people have to keep on being reminded about it to keep on pushing forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really one thing that we became really interested in the film was about how most of the members of Coombe and half of Throbbing Gristle as well, they were from working class families. They didn't go to, they left high school at an early age. They didn't go to have college educations, but they wanted to live life in a certain kind of way, and they did it. And I think there's something quite moving about that, especially given how they were really living hand to mouth for a lot of the time, but still they they pursued it in a really hardcore way.
Well, very cool. Well, thanks again, Dan. Appreciate getting a chance to chat with you, and of course, just making this wonderful film.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks to everyone who came to watch the film. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing what you put together next.
Thanks.